The Colorado River was included as potential wilderness, and that was because of the non-conforming motorized use. With the thinking that if that use were ever to go away, then it would fully qualify for immediate designation. And the park also has a couple of small private in-holdings that are excluded from the wilderness, but they would qualify if the park were to obtain those lands. So just some of the policy here. Again, if you have lands that qualify, if you found that in your studies and your recommendation was submitted, then you are required to manage in the same way as if it were designated. And that we shouldn't do anything, we should take no action that would jeopardize that suitability. And it also speaks to how we do our business and when we make these management decisions, they need to be consistent with that minimum requirement. Remember that piece in the Act, except as necessary to meet the minimum requirements for management of the area's wilderness. Here it is again. So this is a big part of my job. This is the fun I have working with park staff, researchers, educators. When we're looking at implementing some type of management action, whether it's a science project, humpback chub translocation, or others, it's sort of a two-part. We ask the question first, is this action necessary for the management of the area as wilderness? Not just for the management of Grand Canyon National Park, but Grand Canyon National Park wilderness. And sometimes the answer is, oftentimes the answer is yes. And sometimes we're not so sure, but there's other reasons why we might be doing it. And then the second part of the question is, how are you going to implement that action? What is the minimum tool? So that's where we go through a very deliberative process, and we ask the project proponent basically to lay out some alternatives and then evaluate them against how they impact the different elements of wilderness character, and also how they impact park resources. I just had to throw a few of these in here so I can catch my breath. Some of you are familiar with this footage. 1960 upriver run, conquering lava falls. We could pretend that it's a park ranger implementing the minimum tool. It's actually an Australian or a New Zealander. So just a few examples of the minimum requirement. Sort of one of the bigger arenas is fire management. There's different types of fire management actions. There's prescribed fires. There's dealing with wildland fire. They also call it unplanned events, and that sometimes may just include managing it for resource benefits, or it might require that they suppress it. So in a lot of cases, we might say, for prescribed fire, we're introducing fires into areas that need some vegetation, need some cleansing, helping to get back to a natural fire regime, helping the ecosystem. But what we really need to look at carefully, and we try to, is how we do business. I mentioned that a large portion of the North Rim forests are wilderness. In fact, probably over 90% of that is. And there's a lot of fire activity over there with lightning strikes and prescribed fires and all that. So we just, work closely with the fire managers to, evaluate the different aspects of dealing with those fires. They hear from me every year. I ask the same questions. Oftentimes I have the same answers, but the answers are starting to change a little bit. Do you need to use chainsaws? Can you use crosscut saws and hand tools? We do a lot of work along the river corridor in the backcountry, and one of our best examples is our tamarack removal project. I don't know how many hours, Lori, how many trips have been taken, nearly 100% of them either by backpacking or on non-motorized rafting. Minimum tool, not a chainsaw was used. All those volunteers have big, big muscles. This is a series of slides about our humpback chub translocation project. And if there's specific questions about that, Mark or Jan could better answer them, but just another example. The chub were removed from the Little Colorado and then put in a holding facility so that they could grow and become healthy before they went into the Grand Canyon wilderness at Shinlin Creek. The fisheries biologist and I sat down and said, well, how can we get those guys there in a way that they will survive? So we looked at different transportation methods, and they really, we're talking about an endangered species here. So we chose helicopter transportation. They got rides in really good coolers, and as soon as they hit the ground, they were being moved to the water by the biologists. Some of the work that they do on site, we looked at the methods that they use, some of the electrofishing or the fish, or can they use, catching the fish using hook nets and other methods too. So there's a lot of trade-offs involved. And just another example is the science. There's a lot of science on the river done by the Park Service and the USGS, and there's a lot of sophisticated equipment that's used. And every year we get together, we, once again, asking the same questions about the type of equipment that's being used. And it's also a matter of when you need to go down there. We have a 6-month period, actually 6.5-month no motors period. And some of the work, sometimes the timing is necessary to go in the non-motorized use period. So we really look at that really, really hard and try to see if we can make changes. So, challenges in all of this, but trade-offs as well. So Grand Canyon Wilderness, not designated yet, but is it worth it? Raise your hands. It's time to sing. I think so. Even though we have some of those internal challenges, and we certainly have a lot of external challenges, it sure is. I mean, you guys probably all have a personal connection to that place. So now, channeling Howard Sonnheiser again, thinking of those 4 wilderness qualities, kind of looking at, some of the external threats and the internal threats. And I would say, I'm just going to run through a couple slides, and really the pictures themselves might, I think you'll get it, why wilderness is important. Uranium mining, there's a long history of mining in and around Grand Canyon. But this was a recent effort by a lot of sweat and tears by Jan and Martha on this one. Still dealing with it, but some victories there. How many of you folks in this room have been dealing with this in the last couple of days, last couple of months, last couple of decades? So even though Glen Canyon Dam is outside of Grand Canyon, the way it's being operated has profound effects on Grand Canyon's resources and its wilderness character, wilderness experience. So if you're not aware, there is a process going on right now that's revisiting the dam operations. It's called the Long-Term Experimental Management Plan, but it's an attempt to use the science that's been done in the last 15 years to inform how the dam can be managed in a way that's compatible with Grand Canyon resources, and of course, wilderness. Out in the West End, a lot of these activities represented up here are actually not on National Park Service lands, but they sure have an effect. Folks enjoying the Skywalk and Grand Canyon West are coming in from Las Vegas for the day. I couldn't help but, of course, put up Jetman over there. An Evel Knievel sort. Just using the Grand Canyon as another trick. This was actually, he came to the National Park Service and asked for a permit to do this, and he said, no, that is not appropriate to do over a national park. But he went out in the West End and he actually did not go over the river, but he went over a large side canyon there. So. And our latest, right in the heart of Grand Canyon Wilderness, proposal just out of the gate. Very special place. Can't imagine that. That's why it's still an artist rendering at this point. Please keep it that way. So just wrapping up here, some the language from the Organic Act, sort of our mission to preserve the park resources for the enjoyment of and leaving them unimpaired. And from the Wilderness Act, same type of message here. So I guess my challenge to you is to, if you're not already, and I know many of you are, get involved. Some of these last slides that we just saw is just like, really? Is this what we want Grand Canyon National Park to be? Is this what you want for your children? So thanks for your time. Questions?